This happened about 5 years ago when I was 16, during my last summer at a sleepaway camp in West Virginia. I was only there for a month, but it felt like the longest month of my life. My cabin was filled with girls I knew from previous summers, plus one girl nobody knew. Right. She was kind of the odd one out, and it was clear after a few days that she kept to herself and struggled to fit in. I did my best to include her in our usual activities, while the rest of my friends didn't pay her much attention. After about a week, Mary started clinging to me. I figured it was because she saw me as a friend, since I was the only one who showed her any kindness. Wherever I went, she was right there, always a step behind me, hovering in my peripheral vision. We had to take buddies to the bathroom, and whenever I casually mentioned I was going, she'd jump up and volunteer to go with me. I started noticing weird habits of hers. When we walked to activities, she'd stay right beside me, and if she noticed our steps were out of sync, like my right leg moving forward when her left did, she'd skip to adjust so we were walking in perfect step. It sounds a bit questionable, but I thought maybe I was overthinking it. That is, until several of my friends mentioned they'd noticed the same things without me saying a word. During meals, we had assigned tables, and even though Mary sat across the entire dining hall from me, she never stopped watching. I'd go up to the buffet, fill my plate, and as I sat down, she'd head up and pick the exact same foods I did, all while staring at me. This happened with every activity. At this point, I wasn't creeped out yet, just a little weirded out by her tendencies. On a Tuesday, I was just starting to ride the horse I'd been assigned during a ring lesson. This horse was a bit wild from the winter off and bucked me off, forcing me to stay in the infirmary during lesson times for the rest of the week. The following week, I watched as Mary went out of her way to request the same horse I'd fallen off of. I was perplexed by this, and of course, that Tuesday, I watched her throw herself off the horse and end up in the infirmary with me. My 1 hour a day to escape her was now gone too. I started to get really annoyed because no matter what I was doing, she was always there. We had to switch bunks midway through the session, and I was genuinely pissed when she requested not only the same cabin as me, but the bed right next to mine. We both picked top bunks along the same wall, so my feet were at her head. Then I started noticing even weirder things. One day, I was writing a letter home and felt like I was being watched. I glanced to my right and saw Mary sitting facing me, her head cocked to the side, staring at me with this demonic smile. My stomach dropped. A couple of nights after that, I woke up with the same feeling of being watched. It was pitch black, but I grabbed my flashlight to head to the bathroom since I was already up. When I turned on the light, I saw Mary standing next to my bed, her head at my level, watching me sleep. She was just standing in the middle of the cabin, staring. I was speechless. I started to leave for the bathroom, and she followed. By now, I was thoroughly creeped out. Stuff like that kept happening for the rest of the session. When her parents finally came to pick her up, I refused to even look up to say goodbye. I've never been so happy to leave a place in my life. I can't fully express the level of creepiness over a computer, but I can say I genuinely felt like I was in danger when I was near her. I never want to figure out why she was so obsessed with me. I'm a 25-year-old guy living in a small town in Missouri where I've spent my entire life. This happened on a Saturday a little past 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The weather was perfect, so parents all over town were taking their kids to play at the park. I have a strict routine and try my best to walk for exercise every day. I was getting tired of walking around my neighborhood. It was tedious seeing the same roads, houses, trees, and cars. So on this day, I decided to head to one of the many parks in town that had a paved, mile-long circular trail. It was nice, and it was the closest park to my house, just a 5-minute drive. When I pulled into the parking lot, I saw kids playing and heard their laughter, with parents chatting and having a good time. But I also noticed a man sitting in his car, facing forward, with a clear view of everyone. At first, I didn't think much of it. I figured he might have just arrived as I did and was about to leave, maybe on his phone. I was still in my car, texting a friend about grabbing dinner at Applebee's after my walk. 10 minutes later, the guy in the car next to me was still there, just watching. He was fixated on something, his eyes and thoughts locked in. By then, most of the parents and kids were starting to head home. My conversation with my buddy had wrapped up, so I got out of my car, locked the doors, put my keys in my right pocket, and started my playlist on shuffle with my earbuds in. I was a bit paranoid about this guy still sitting there, so I decided to walk counterclockwise. As I got pretty far along the trail, I glanced back to see if he was still there. All the kids and parents were gone, but he was still in his car. Normally, I'd have my music cranked up to max volume, but not this time. I kept it low enough to hear the songs, but also stay aware of my surroundings. As I kept up my pace, about a quarter of the way through, the man suddenly got out of his car. I took a deep breath, sighed, and muttered to myself, "All right, let's see what happens." My stomach was churning with an uneasy feeling, and that vibe was overwhelming. Trusting my instincts, I prepped myself for whatever might go down. I'm not easily scared, mostly because I'm always alert and know how to stay calm in tough situations. Instead of following me, the guy took the opposite side of the trail. My first thought was, that's clever. He was smart and knew what he was doing. What he didn't know was that I was already a step ahead, running through possible scenarios in my head. As he walked on the other side, we both knew we'd cross paths in a matter of minutes. As we got closer, his eyes locked onto me. I took my keys out of my pocket, gripped them in my hand, and slid the largest key between my knuckles like a makeshift weapon. He was a big guy, stocky, dressed like a factory worker in brown steel toe boots, jeans, and a rough denim jacket. Then it happened. With the key still in my hand, we passed each other. As he walked by, he grabbed his crotch with one hand and said hi with a sadistic grin. I ignored him and kept moving. Suddenly, I heard him loudly say, "Hey." I was about 15 feet ahead. I stopped, turned, and said, yes." Still smiling, he asked for my name. I lied and said, "Peter." He kept going, asking, "How are you today, Peter?" I replied, "Good, thanks," gave a small nod, and turned back to keep walking. I muted my headphones for caution, listening for footsteps. I was now another quarter of the way through the walk, about 100 to 150 feet away. I glanced back, and oddly enough, he was still standing in the same spot where he'd tried to talk to me, watching me. His posture and eyes hadn't moved an inch, and his hand was still at his crotch. Thankfully, I made it back to my car safe and sound and left immediately. I thought the whole thing was just a disgusting encounter, and I'd never see the guy again. I was wrong. A month later, the incident was long forgotten. I had to run to the local grocery store to grab a few things for dinner. While there, I checked out the new movie releases. As I got to that section, I saw the same guy. I pretended not to notice him, acting like I was minding my own business. As he walked toward another aisle, he stopped, his eyes wide as saucers. I left the electronics section and headed to the clothing department. He was following me. At first, I told myself, maybe he's not stalking me. Maybe he's just shopping here too. But my paranoia kicked into high gear, so I played cat and mouse. I walked through the toy aisle, the shampoo and bath accessories, the girls' clothing section, and finally the lawn and garden area. My instincts were right. He was making his way toward me. This time, I never looked back to avoid tipping him off. Instead, I opened my phone's camera app, switched it to selfie mode, and used it to watch behind me while acting oblivious. When I got out of his sight, he stopped where he was, looking disappointed and frustrated. I secretly snapped a picture of him when the chance came, paid for my stuff, and left. When I got home, I uploaded the picture to social media, explaining what this stranger was doing. By sheer luck, a few friends commented that he'd done this kind of creepy stuff before at a local church. I also learned he was a registered sex offender. The tables had turned. I had his name and details about who he was, and probably still is. Nothing major has happened since, except for a few times when we ended up at the same store by chance. Somehow he always spotted me, like he was constantly on the lookout for me wherever he went. He never tried to follow me again, but his eyes were always there. I'm glad I'm safe, but I hope this serves as a lesson for others to stay aware of their surroundings at all times. You never know what could happen. Sometime in June or July, I was hanging out with my best friend Kate, also a girl, and our two guy friends Alex and Aaron. We were just chilling on some benches behind a baseball field, talking and catching up. After a while, we decided to go for a hike and smoke at the top of the hill that overlooks the city. Halfway up, some random guy stopped us and offered us half his blunt. Aaron, being the stoner he is, happily took it and even got the guy's number to buy from him another time. As we kept hiking, I snapped some pictures and Alex was right there with me, joking around and having a good time. When we finally reached the top, the view was absolutely gorgeous, but I was also pretty wiped out. We smoked and decided to explore the trails further up the hill. The area was super wooded, perfect for a chill walk when you're high. But halfway through our hike, we passed this man with 2 kids. Normally, that wouldn't have fazed me since people hike up there all the time, but one of the kids, a little girl, had a black eye. It was swollen, like really bad. We stopped at trail map to gather our thoughts, and Kate spoke up saying, "Guys, I think we just walked through a crime scene." I chimed in, pointing out how the little girl's eye was all swollen and black, like someone had hit her. Then Kate added, "Guys," she said, "where's my mom?" in Spanish. By this point, we were pretty high and starting to freak out, getting all paranoid. Alex and Aaron grabbed some rocks, ready to go beat the guy up if it came to that. We kept talking about it, but then Aaron looked over and said, "Guys, look, they're just picking berries. It's probably just a family." We decided to brush it off and keep hiking, but the whole time, I felt this uneasy knot in my stomach. We looped around the area later, and the family was gone. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Why was her eye so swollen? Why was she asking for her mom? The more I thought about it, the more I worried something seriously messed up was going on. Maybe the high made me paranoid, and it was just a normal family outing. Nothing ever came of it, no news or anything, but to this day, I still feel super uneasy about the whole thing. When this happened, I was about 8 years old, living in a small town in western North Carolina. My memory's a bit fuzzy, so a lot of this comes from my mom's telling. Not much goes on around here. Everyone knows everyone, and there's not a whole lot to do, so plenty of folks end up messed up on pain pills, meth, you name it. When I was around 5, we moved into a house built by Habitat for Humanity. The land was donated, and our place sits up a long dirt road. There's a neighbor's driveway partway up, then the road forks, a small driveway leads to our house, and a trail heads into the woods, where people used to go hunting. Where we live, hunting's a big deal, so it wasn't unusual for folks to drive up our road and head into the forest behind our house. We always figured they had permission from the guy who owned the land. Usually, it was the same trucks or cars we'd see. But one day, a new vehicle showed up on our main driveway. I don't remember exactly what it looked like, but I think it was white, and there was a roll of paper towels visible inside. Mom and I went outside to check it out. We locked eyes with the man driving, and something about his gaze was just chilling, like you could feel something dark in him. Have you ever looked at someone and just known they were bad news? It was that kind of vibe. He drove up the hunting trail and was gone for a while. When he came back out of the woods, Mom tried to jot down his license plate number and got a good look at him. Whatever she saw in his face or his expression spooked her so bad she stopped writing. A week or so later, we saw a news story about a man named Gary Hilton. They showed his face in his vehicle, and we recognized both instantly. It was the same guy who'd been in the woods behind our house. You could even see that same roll of paper towels in his car. The worst part? Some of the bodies or body parts of his victims were never found. When I'd go hiking in those woods, I'd come across weird stuff. A pair of pants just lying there, a strange misshapen wooden cross that looked like it could mark a grave, though it was probably unrelated. Our dog even brought home some bones that looked suspiciously human-shaped. Thankfully, Gary Hilton got 4 life sentences, so he's not getting out of prison. We're pretty sure he hid a body or some remains in those woods. No one would think to search the forest off some random country road. He has to know we saw him, and he knows where we live. Thank God he's locked up for good. My name's Mike, and I'm a hiking and outdoors enthusiast from Cleveland, Tennessee. I love hitting the trails and hunting with my buddies. A few years back, my friend Derek and I took a week off work and planned a few days for a hiking trip in the Cayuga Wilderness, just south of the Tennessee line. We started at Jack's River and hiked to the falls. It was summer, and this spot's one of those places where all the effort and river crossings really pay off. From there, we took a trail through the rice camp area, dark, secluded, with thick woods and a heavy canopy. After crossing Buckeye Mountain, we turned right onto the Panther Creek Trail. Panther Creek Trail had some killer views and tons of small streams along the way. We set up camp at the falls on Panther Creek that night. Derek and I got to talking about how many little trails branch off out here and how someone could get lost forever just exploring them. The waterfall drowned out the forest sounds, and we both slept pretty soundly. In the morning, we packed up and hit the Conasauga River and its trail, heading north. Along the way, we spotted a trail veering off to the right. Looking back, it was probably one of the many entrances to the Conasauga, but at the time, we had no clue where it went. Derek wanted to check it out, and I reluctantly tagged along. I didn't want us to tire ourselves out and have to backtrack, losing time. The detour was steep, and by the time we hit a dirt road, we were wiped. We stopped to eat and take a breather at this random spot. I figured we might run into other hikers to chat with, but no one showed up. Derek kept pushing to see where the dirt road led since it wasn't on any of our maps. I think I've since found it on another map, but I haven't gone back to confirm. We argued for a bit, Derek's stubborn as hell, but we agreed to go a mile or two and then turn back. The road was boring, just gravel surrounded by forest, no scenery, and the sun was beating down. We got hot and drank all our water, with no springs or streams in sight to refill. Around a curve, we noticed a bunch of birds circling a lower part of the forest to our left. A bit further, also on the left, we saw a trail with a metal gate, like the ones forestry services use for shortcuts. Figuring the birds meant water was nearby, we decided to head down there to find a spring and then get back to our original route. Not long after starting down the trail, we came across what looked like 4 garbage bags leaning against a tree. There were signs of an old camp, a fire pit that hadn't been used in days, since it had rained recently, but not while we were there. The setup was odd, with tightly braided plastic wrap wound around a tree, like someone used it as cordage. It seemed like a weird spot for a shelter relative to the fire pit. We figured it was a poacher's camp, since the bags were full of rags soaked with blood, all left in a sloppy, abandoned mess, typical for poachers. We decided to burn the garbage to keep bears or other animals from eating the plastic and rags. Oddly, there were no beer cans or bottles, which is unusual for these parts, where litter like that's common at poacher camps. Instead, it was just bloody rags, tape cords, zip ties, and a ton of McDonald's cups and wrappers. Derek and I even joked about how many McDonald's runs it'd take to fill a bag like that. As we headed back to the dirt road, I picked up a couple of things. There was a small fire striker tool near the camp, and a bit up the hill. I almost missed it, but I found a tiny black square on the ground. "Hey, Derek, look, it's one of those micro SD cards people use in cameras," I said. He didn't care much, and honestly, we were both just focused on getting back to the river for water. Exhausted, hot, and thirsty, I tossed the card in my pack and forgot about it. The rest of our trip was uneventful. We hit a connector trail and took our time getting back to Jack's River on the 3rd day. Over a year later, I found the SD card tucked in a seam at the bottom of my old pack. That trip had mostly faded from memory by then. I gave the card to my wife, not thinking much of it. A few days later, she called me at work, freaking out, saying she had to show me something when I got home. When I saw what was on the card, I was horrified. The pictures were awful, mostly taken in the dark, showing people tied to a tree, blood on their faces, blood everywhere. Different people, their faces twisted in fear, pain, or despair. Some were struggling, others looked unconscious or worse. Most were men, but at least 2 were women, maybe more if some looked similar. The photos felt too real, too raw, motion blur, imperfect angles, nothing staged. Some were close-ups of tears streaming down faces. Others were such a bloody mess it was hard to make out details. The blood and wounds seemed mostly on faces, but for the women, their chests too. One had faint scratch marks carved in patterns. Another had deep gaping gashes, like she'd been split open. I couldn't tell if it was the same woman in later shots. They were that gruesome. Derek had moved to Ohio by then, so I called him and told him about it. It took him a minute to even remember the trip. but he was shocked and wanted to see the pictures. I refused. I never wanted to look at them again, let alone share them. I put the SD card in a plastic bag and took it to our local police station, explaining everything. I wanted them to look at the photos right then, but they just logged it as evidence and had me repeat the story a few times. They took everyone's contact info, but I'm not sure they even pinned down the exact location. It was a confusing spot. Since then, I've tried multiple times to get updates, but they always give me the runaround. They sent everything to the Murray County Police Department in Georgia, since that's where we were when we found it, and I guess it's their jurisdiction. Every time I call, it takes forever for them to even figure out what case I'm talking about. I just want answers, what was going on out there, who those poor people were, how much danger we were in. But they act like it's none of my business unless I have new info to share. Looking back, the details that seemed meaningless at the time haunt me. All those birds we saw, what if there were bodies down there? What if there still are? They would have been just a short way down those steep hills from the camp, if my sense of direction's right. That braided plastic I thought was for a shelter, what if it was used to tie people to that tree? What if we had a close call and didn't even realize it? These thoughts keep me up at night. If anyone has any leads, info, or even theories, please reach out to me at the email buster we'll leave in the description below. I've been a volunteer firefighter for a couple of years now. When you first start out, they usually stick you on engine duty, where you focus on putting out fires. The latter work, running into buildings to save people, that's typically reserved for those with more experience. New guys don't usually get to do that right away. But I got lucky. They let me move over to Ladder 29 early on, where I started doing rescue work. Most of our calls are medical, so when we get a fire, it's a big deal. One night, we got a call about a structure fire in an older part of town, where the buildings were packed tightly, wall to wall. The fire had started in one house, but had already spread to two others by the time it was reported to us. Most of the houses in that area were abandoned, which made things trickier. When we arrived, the engine crew immediately started tackling the original house, while the ladder team split up to handle the other two. I followed my lieutenant and another firefighter into one of the houses. We searched thoroughly, but found no signs of anyone inside. Then, over the roar of the flames, I heard a faint cry for help. Without thinking, I bolted toward the sound, eager to play the hero. I came to a door that led to the basement, one we'd completely missed during our initial sweep. I radioed back to the team outside. Ladder 29 irons, we've got people trapped down here. My lieutenant and the senior firefighter chewed me out for running off on my own, but they heard the voices too. We grabbed the axe we had and started chopping at the door. It was unbelievably thick. We were taking solid swings, but the damn thing wouldn't give. Eventually, we got it weakened to the point where it felt like one more hit would bring it down. We shouted to the people inside, promising we'd get them out. But then we heard a deafening crash. The door, which had been so close to breaking, wouldn't budge anymore. We knew what that meant. The house had caved in behind it. The voices on the other side started screaming, blood-curdling, agonizing screams, like they were being burned alive. It was the most horrific sound I'd ever heard. We tried desperately to break through, but it was no use. The radio crackled with orders to get out of the house immediately, as more of the structure could collapse. I knew what that meant. We were leaving whoever was down there to burn. I stumbled outside, sat on the truck, and sobbed into my gloves. I felt so helpless. My whole life, I dreamed of being a hero, and when the moment came, I failed. I felt like I should have saved those people or died trying. Instead, we backed out. Logically, I knew there was nothing more we could have done. Getting ourselves killed wouldn't have helped anyone, but damn it, the guilt was eating me alive. A few days later, when I returned for another shift, I learned the people in the basement were teenagers. They'd been down there for some reason, and their bodies were so badly burned they couldn't be identified. I won't go into the gruesome details, but the case photos we submitted still haunt me to this day. I continue to volunteer as a firefighter, and I've done my best to move past that night. Every firefighter has experiences like this. It's part of the job. But when I lie in bed at night, I still hear those screams, the desperate cries of kids begging for help, forever etched into my mind. This happened about 4 years ago when I was part of a wildland fire crew in southern Oregon. We were dispatched to a fire in an area called Rogue River, on a place known as Dead Indian Mountain. It was my first time working night operations. We arrived and got straight to work on the fire's uncontrolled edge. The wilderness was an old-growth forest with massive trees spaced far apart. The ground looked like something from the moon, covered in white ash where the fire had burned through, consuming all the underbrush and opening up the woods on the fire's side. It made the shadows dance, playing tricks with the light. Our crew spent the rest of that week controlling a mile-long stretch of the fire's edge hand-dug trail that wound down into a holler and up to a cliff. Once the fire was under control, our job shifted to mop up, where we dig around and extinguish any remaining flames and embers within about 100 feet of the line. It's tedious work, and we're trained not to get complacent and to stay alert. The standard fire crew has 20 people, and ours was split into 2 groups of 10. The other crews stayed at the top, prepping that end of the line. By the third night, some guys started joking about hearing thumps and seeing rocks thrown at them from the darkness. The next night, I got a taste of what they were talking about. While I was working alone on the fire's side of the trail, a rock, pretty big, landed right next to me with a silent thud in the ash. I'd been milling around in the dark, digging out embers, and the closest headlamp was about 50 feet away. I thought, real funny, guys. So I ditched my pack and helmet, their reflectors would have given me away, and grabbed my tools, sneaking off into the shadows. I used the faint light from the flames to guide me down the hill, determined to catch whoever was messing with me. I wasn't a rookie. I'd spent my entire adult life in the woods by then. I was 26, headstrong, in great shape, and damn good at my job. I loved it. Most of the guys in my half of the crew were young rookies, except for the squad boss and one other guy named Jason. Jason was new to firefighting, but had been a logger before. He was in his late 30s, with a scratchy, raspy voice and a natural knack for leading the younger 18 and 19-year-olds. He had a rough edge, a kind of "I've seen some shit" attitude. I figured he might be the one throwing rocks, maybe in some weird power struggle since I had more experience and certifications, which gave me more responsibility. I was convinced it was him. I knew I could sneak up on each group unnoticed. Starting at the bottom of the trail, I heard rustling behind me and froze, wondering how someone got the jump on me. I waited until it stopped and was sure it was gone. I figured it might have been my squad boss, who sometimes lurked in the dark to check on our work. Believe it or not, that's normal. Leaving the edge of the holler, I moved up through the woods, paralleling the trail. The ash muffled my steps, letting my large frame move silently. It was incredible watching the tree shadows dance around me, an ever-changing play of light and darkness, like nothing stood still. I caught sight of the first group near the bottom, just feet away from where they worked. I enjoyed being so sneaky as I listened to them talk about hearing knocks and rocks being thrown. They sounded nervous. Jason was there, badgering the 2 young guys in his raspy voice. I wondered if that was his way of staying calm. Then I heard him say, "It does kind of feel like we're being watched, though." I couldn't tell if he was trying to spook the rookies or if he meant it, but instead of looking my way, he nodded toward the other side of the trail. I moved on before anyone spotted me. The next group was hard at work, not talking much, just doing their job. I left them and headed back to my group at the top. On the way, I noticed a lone headlamp moving down the line, my squad boss checking on the groups. I caught up to him and explained what I was doing so he wouldn't worry when he didn't see me with my crew. I startled him, which was odd. He was a small but tough ex-Marine, not easily shaken. I mentioned hearing someone in the holler and asked if he'd been down there earlier, knowing he couldn't have been. He brushed it off and went on his way. I snuck up on my squad, scaring the hell out of them. They were rattled, saying they'd heard noises above and all around in the shadows. I reassured them it was normal, even though I was starting to feel spooked myself. Dead Indian Mountain, indeed. The next night, the joking about the noises ramped up, mostly targeting the guys who admitted they'd heard things. We arrived with orders to patrol the line. At the bottom, near the holler, we sent our youngest rookie, a kid, about a football field down to collect some hose and a fittings bag. We all posted up and waited. After 20 minutes, we were like, "What the hell's taking so long?" Then he let out a scream. like a woman's, about 50 feet above us on the green side of the hill. We heard him crashing through the brush as he burst out, explaining he was being followed. He was sure something was down there with him, thumping, growling noises. You could see the fear in his face, and he was hyperventilating. He dropped the fittings bag and hose but clung to his shovel. His panic was unsettling. The night went on, and we patrolled the line, doing our jobs. The kid calmed down, and instead of ribbing him, everyone was supportive. The rest of the night was uneventful. Looking back, I realized our squad boss kept us in 2 10-man groups instead of smaller ones, with him moving between them. I think he sensed something was off about that place, even if it slowed us down. He made that call for the rest of the operation. The next couple of nights were quiet. We did shoulder grids up the hill from the holler and back down, and people seemed to forget about the noises and eerie feelings. On what we thought was our last night, the line was mostly inactive. We hiked down to take a break near where the kid had heard noises. About 3/4 of our 10-man group were in a line, moving at a good pace with Jason leading. Suddenly, he stopped without calling, "Hold the line." We piled up in confusion as his raspy voice shouted, "What the hell is that?" "Don't move, guys. Hold up. There's an animal ahead." Animals act strange during fires, so we're cautious with wildlife, even elk or deer, which can mess you up. With 50 to 65 pounds of gear, running's tough, let alone fighting something off. It's best to show dominance and scare them away. Our headlamps panned the darkness as we bunched together. Jason yelled, "There it is," and our lights landed on a set of huge green eyes about 20 feet ahead. We made out a massive dark shape sprinting across the line to the unburned side. When our lights found it again, we saw 3 sets of green eyes. The middle set was about 3 feet taller than the others and easily 3 feet taller than me, and I'm 6 feet 3 inches. Chaos erupted. Everyone was yelling. I grabbed a shovel from the guy next to me and started banging it against my Pulaski, making a god-awful racket. A few others joined in. The shorter sets of eyes dropped straight down and vanished, but the middle set stayed put. I was scared shitless, but part of me wanted to prove I was tougher than whatever this was. My heart was pounding, and everyone was behind me. I got the sense that if I got any closer, I'd be done for. I kept thinking, what is this thing? The whole standoff lasted about 3 minutes. Yelling, banging tools, threatening it. No animal would have stood its ground like that, but this thing didn't budge. My squad boss ordered us to stop the noise and move on. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off it. Some guys tried to say it was an elk or a bear, but I could see the fear in their eyes. They were lying. The squad boss said, "Guys, there are animals in the woods." Nobody was comfortable. We moved to the top of the line and stayed by the vans, proof no one wanted to go back out there, not even the boss. The guys swapped scary stories, but half refused to agree on what they'd seen. I got the closest, and I know damn well it wasn't a deer, bear, or elk. It was huge and unafraid of humans or fire. When the sun came up, the other half of the crew met us by the vans. As I walked over to the crew boss, I noticed footprints around the vans, leading into the burn. I said, "Hey, look at these." He came over, stuck his boot in one, and said something like, "Can't be anything," as he scuffed them up. I saw toes in those prints, classic Sasquatch tracks. I tried to point it out, but he kept erasing them. He had to have noticed. I was freaking out. Walking away, I felt strange, knowing I couldn't talk about it without sounding crazy. I've told a few friends this story, but I'm never sure if they believe me. I know what I saw, it was unlike anything before or since. In my 11 years in the woods, I've seen weird stuff, but nothing like this. There are things out there we don't understand. I haven't hiked alone since. Jason and I became good friends, and we've worked other fire crews together. Sometimes, over drinks, we revisit that night, but only with each other. My one piece of advice from a veteran of the woods: never hike alone. Every year, my family and I make a pilgrimage to our batch, a secluded retreat in the absolute middle of nowhere, completely isolated from the world. Getting there is no small feat. We drive 4.5 hours north into the countryside, followed by a 25-mile gravel road that serves as the driveway. This winding path takes us through dense forest areas, past abandoned century-old farmhouses, and across vast, untouched land. The area where our batch sits was once part of a thriving town in the mid-1700s, bustling with visionary factories, a school, a hotel, and other establishments. But by the early 1900s, the town was abandoned, leaving behind a haunting legacy. The town's history is steeped in darkness. First, there was a tragedy where a group of schoolchildren drowned after a rotten bridge collapsed beneath them while they were playing on the main wharf. Then, the hotel owner's daughter, plagued by severe mental health issues, drowned her infant brother before hanging herself. Finally, there's the story of a 17-year-old boy we'll call John, who suffered from severe schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. His mental health struggles allegedly led him to commit a horrific act. John persuaded a dozen local children to join him on the beach, where he had built a bonfire. He then shot 11 of the children and beat the 12th to death with a piece of driftwood. Some dismissed this event due to the lack of historical records, but many locals believe it to be true. After what my family and I experienced, we're convinced it's real. My grandfather originally bought the property to store his boat, but we began camping there, which eventually turned the place into a batch and a cherished yearly tradition. He didn't learn about the town's dark history until 10 years after purchasing the land, but even then, it didn't deter us. We loved our time there, until the events of 2013. I was 19 at the time, and I've been visiting the batch every year since I was born, as it had been in our family for 40 years. It was the final night of our annual escape from civilization, and we were soaking up the summer, enjoying good food, and bonding as a family. We were gathered in the main living room, sharing scary stories and reminiscing about past trips. Around 2:30 a.m., I was jolted awake by the sound of footsteps running across the sand outside the batch. The batch is right on the beach, so close that when the tide comes in, the water practically laps beneath it. At night, all you hear are gentle waves and the quiet hum of the countryside. At first, I thought it might be my dad coming back from floundering, but I quickly realized he was fast asleep in the bunk to my left. I sat there, frozen, listening to the running for about 2 minutes before waking my dad to hear it too. As soon as I woke him, the sound stopped. I told him what I'd heard, and he brushed it off, saying it was probably just an animal. I managed to fall back asleep after about 10 minutes, only to be woken again 30 minutes later by the most terrifying sound I've ever heard. It was a series of deep guttural growls, inhuman and bone-chilling, coming from beneath the batch. The growls were so loud they woke my entire family. We sat up, listening in silence until they finally stopped. I'll never forget the look on my dad's face. He's usually the tough, macho type, but he looked utterly terrified. Normally, we'd ask him to go check on something like this, but none of us wanted anyone to leave the batch. Several minutes passed before the growling ceased entirely. We sat there in shock, trying to make sense of what we'd heard. Though I knew it wasn't anything human, we convinced ourselves it must have been some kind of animal and eventually drifted back to sleep. But an hour later, I was woken again, this time by an overwhelming sensation that someone or something was staring at me. It's hard to describe, but it felt like a thick, oppressive energy surrounding me. I was sweating profusely, my head buried in my sleeping bag despite the 80-degree heat, too terrified to look around. This feeling persisted for about 10 minutes until curiosity got the better of me, and I had to peek. Slowly, I lifted my head and looked around the room. What I saw will haunt me forever. It still makes me sick to think about. Near the back door of the batch, there's a large window overlooking a small deck. Standing there, perfectly still, was a tall hooded figure draped in black. It was at least 6 feet 7 inches or 7 feet tall to be visible at the height of the window. I couldn't see a face, just the dark outline of something or someone cloaked in black. I was paralyzed, staring at it for what felt like an eternity, probably 2 minutes, before the loudest, deepest growl I'd ever heard came from its direction. The sound woke my family, and in my panic, I jumped out of my sleeping bag. When I looked back, the figure was gone. Trembling and nearly in tears from fear, I told my family what I'd seen. We were too shaken to go back to sleep, and I was a wreck from anxiety. The next day, my uncle came to visit, and I recounted the terrifying events of the night before. What he told me sent chills down my spine. He revealed that the land our batch is built on once belonged to John's mother. She had reportedly conducted numerous satanic rituals in her home and severely abused John, which likely contributed to his mental health issues. My uncle had learned this from a friend, a priest near the old town, whose relatives had passed down the story. He admitted he hadn't believed it himself and hadn't mentioned it to us because he didn't want to scare us away from visiting. I don't know why this paranormal activity happened only that one time, when nothing similar had occurred in the 40 years my family had been going to the batch. Despite the emotionally scarring experience, we still visit every year. The days there are beautiful in the summer, filled with warmth and memories. But at night, I'm always on edge, praying that my family and I never encounter anything like that again. In my office, it's a running joke that I always get the weirdest calls, and honestly, it's true. One of the more memorable ones was from a drunk guy who meant to call the police to file a noise complaint about his own party. While some of my calls are pretty strange, they're usually fairly tame. I've been lucky as I haven't had too many disturbing or heartbreaking stories to share from my years as a 911 operator. But if you're looking for those kinds of stories, I could point you to several of my colleagues, because sadly, there's no shortage of them in this line of work. Still, there's one call that stands out, one that I had about a year or two ago. It was without a doubt one of the most terrifying experiences of my life, and I think it'll stay with me forever. It had been a slow afternoon that day. I know it sounds a bit callous, but when you're not taking calls, this job can get pretty boring. I was covering a friend's evening shift, not expecting much to happen, just counting down the minutes until I could clock out. Then a call came through my line. I slipped on my headset and went through the usual script. 911, what is your emergency? I asked. I think there's someone in my house, came the reply. The voice sounded like it belonged to a young child. My heart sank. Calls from kids are always the hardest. We're trained to gather as much information as possible to understand the situation and determine which emergency services to dispatch. What's your name, sweetie? I asked, keeping my tone calm and upbeat to avoid scaring her more than she already was. Elizabeth, she said softly. I thought I could hear her crying. That's a beautiful name. Mine's Amelia. Though I didn't let it show, I was starting to feel nervous. This is very important. Can you tell me what's happening right now? The line went quiet for a moment, but then Elizabeth spoke again. I think someone's in my house. Where are your parents? I asked. They're not home. I'm not sure where they are. I felt a surge of anger. What kind of parents leave a little girl home alone this late at night? Is there anyone else there with you? Yeah, I think they're looking for... Elizabeth started, but her voice cut off abruptly. If it weren't for her soft, frightened breathing, I would have thought the call had dropped. They said my name, she whispered, definitely crying now. Where are you right now? I asked. I heard a door close. I'm in my parents' closet, she said, her voice a bit louder, probably thinking the intruder wouldn't hear her from there. I hope she was right. I was relieved she had the instinct to hide. Many kids freeze in dangerous situations, especially without parents or older siblings around. I asked for her address, which she gave me. For privacy, I'll just say Elizabeth's house was in a nice neighborhood in my area, not far from the police station, which was a relief. Elizabeth, just focus on my voice. I need you to try to relax. I'm sending the police to your house right now, and they should be there in about 5 minutes. Can you hold on until then? Normally, I try to get more details about the intruder, but with kids, I always err on the side of caution. I'd rather send help and it be a false alarm than risk their safety. Elizabeth didn't answer my question, and it took her longer to respond than I was comfortable with. When she did, it was just one word, listen. I heard the phone crackle as she held it away from her ear. At first, I didn't hear anything, but as I focused on the background noise, I picked up a lot of whispering. I couldn't make out what was being said, but it definitely sounded like more than one person. I prayed the police would get there soon. As much as I help people in this job and as many lives as I've helped save, it's frustrating that I can't do more than talk and wait. Elizabeth's voice came back, hushed and sobbing. He's coming up here. Please help. The police are almost there. I need you to be quiet so he doesn't hear you. "You're going to be okay, sweetie, I promise." She seemed to calm down a bit, and everything went quiet for a moment, except for the whispering, which was much louder now. I still couldn't make out the words, but I was certain it was coming from multiple people, at least 3 distinct voices. Then I heard a loud creak, like a door opening, through the phone. Elizabeth screamed, and I knew the intruder had found her. I was terrified for her, desperately hoping help would arrive in time. "Are you okay? I need you to tell me what's going on," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. I couldn't let her know how scared I was. "There's a bad man," Elizabeth whispered. "He has really long legs and a really big smile." My imagination ran wild, picturing this poor girl cowering in the closet as a towering figure loomed over her. I heard another loud bang from somewhere in the house, followed by someone shouting, "Police!" Thank God. I could still hear Elizabeth crying as the whispering grew even more intense. I couldn't understand why she only mentioned one person when there had to be at least 4 voices. "He isn't touching the floor," she whispered. Then the line went dead. I frantically tried to reconnect, but no matter how many times I called back, there was only silence on the other end. I sat there shaken, hoping the police had gotten to her in time. I want to end with a plea to any parents out there. Please, please don't leave your young children home alone. I haven't heard anything about Elizabeth or her family since that night. The police found only the phone. To fully understand what happened to me, you need some context about the setting and the circumstances. When I was in 2nd grade, I attended an old, underfunded school in northern Illinois with a massive wooden playground built back when the school still had money. You know, the kind of playground that would send suburban soccer moms into a panic, splintery wood, thousands of wasp nests, hidden nooks under the scaffolding, rusty nails, and chains everywhere. Naturally, us kids adored it. Even the high schoolers would sneak over to mess around on the giant structure when the younger ones weren't there. The playground was always crawling with kids of all ages. What made it even better was a large, tangled area we local kids called the brush. It was a dense, sprawling mass of shrubbery that had grown into an unmanageable bramble, swallowing anyone brave enough to crawl inside. We loved it. Over the years, a maze of tiny, hobbit-sized trails had been worn into the brush from kids crawling in and out, snapping branches to carve out miniature clearings and alcoves for secret club meetings or to play jungle. The brush was completely impenetrable to all but the most determined and limber adults, which made us kids feel like hotshots when we managed to slip past the recess aides and dive in. For the rookie teachers and aides, it was usually their job to chase after little punks like us when we hid inside and refused to come out. At the time, I thought the adults were so hell-bent on keeping us out of the brush just because we could hide and sneak around in there. I was too young to understand what the weird plunger things and white floppy tubes were in the deepest parts of the brush. I soon learned, though, that syringes and used condoms weren't the only things to fear. In 2nd grade, I was lucky enough to live right across the street from the big wooden playground in the thicket. Our house was an ugly brown 2-story with a small front lawn. In the yard, we had a tree I climbed all the time and a tire swing I played on constantly. Our neighborhood was quiet, filled with older folks and young families, so during the summer months, my mom and dad would take our dog, my little brother, and me on walks around the neighborhood after dinner, probably to wear us out so we'd go to bed. On the last 2 blocks of our usual loop, I'd always ask my parents if I could run ahead and play on the tire swing while they strolled slowly around the corner and made their way back. They usually agreed, as long as they could see me in the yard from where they were walking. I'd sprint down the road as fast as my scrawny little legs could carry me and play on the swing for 5 or 10 minutes until they reached the driveway and headed inside. One day, I must have been extra hyper and annoying when I begged my parents to let me run ahead and play on the swing, even though we were farther from home than usual. They let me go as we were behind the corner where you turn onto our street. I cut across a couple of neighbors' lawns to get to our front yard and started playing. I hadn't been there long when I heard a man's voice call, "Hey," a couple of times. I looked over and saw a man in a white shirt and cargo pants standing at the edge of the brush, still behind some of the shorter shrubs. He'd clearly popped out of the thicket. I wasn't used to grown men trying to talk to me, so I paused on the swing, staring at him, confused. "Hey," he said, glancing up and down the street. "Hey, do you want to come play with me?" He didn't come closer, staying behind the shrubs, his shoulders hunched like he was trying to shrink into himself. Now, I was a pretty clueless kid, but stranger danger was drilled into us hard at school and in the community, so even I knew his behavior was totally inappropriate and weird for a guy who looked about 30, hiding in the bushes in front of my house. Still, I tried to be polite and called back, "No, thank you, I'm okay." I'd stopped playing by then and stood on the tire swing, staring at the man who hadn't moved. I was a super sociable kid, always running up to strangers and chatting with them, but something about this guy made me uneasy. I was only 8, but this was the first time a man had scared me in a way I wouldn't have words for until I was much older. I didn't want to go near him. I didn't want him to see me. I just wanted my family to hurry up and get home, but they were still about a block away from turning onto our street. The man shuffled behind the shrubs, looked behind him and to the left, then turned back to me. "Please," he begged, balling his hands up and pulling them to his chest in a twisted version of what toddlers do when they're throwing a tantrum. "Please come over here and play. We'll have a lot of fun." He glanced nervously up and down the street as soon as he finished speaking, moving jerkily, clearly more anxious now. That was it for me. My stranger danger alarms were screaming. Our house was locked since we were out, so I couldn't get inside. I had this overwhelming urge to be out of reach, not just farther away, but somewhere this man couldn't get to me, no matter how hard he tried. Without hesitating, I scrambled up the knotted rope of the tire swing and into the tree. Once I reached the first branch, I called out to the man. "My mom and dad said I can't play with strangers, I'm sorry." Then I climbed a couple more branches. Besides, they're coming home soon, and I have to go to bed. The man got even twitchier. "Where are your mom and dad?" he asked. "It's okay to come play for just a little bit." I didn't answer, focusing on climbing. I was now high enough that the branches would have snapped under anything heavier than a tiny 8-year-old. I glanced back at the man, now with a bird's eye view of him and his surroundings, and saw something that sent me into silent hysterics. Behind the man in white was another man, about the same age, dressed in a khaki green shirt and brown pants, crouched behind the same bush the first guy had popped out of, only visible now from my higher vantage point. The scene is burned into my memory. The man in green was crouched like a football player ready to tackle or a baseball player waiting for a low pitch. What terrified me most was that he was holding a large, cream-colored pillowcase in both hands. I knew these were bad, bad men, and they wanted to take me away from my family and home. I was on the verge of a screaming, crying meltdown and told the man in white again that I wasn't going to play with him. My throat was tight, and I was scanning the area for any adults I knew, hoping I could tell someone what was happening. To my absolute relief, I saw my mom, dad, little brother, and our pit bull mix round the corner and start heading down our street toward me and the creeps. I pointed with my skinny, pale arm and started yelling to the man in white that my family was coming right now, and we were going inside. The man didn't believe me and kept trying to coax me down to play, still glancing behind into the side at the crouching man. Finally, the man in white spotted my family about 3 blocks away and visibly panicked. "Please, you have to come here," he begged, taking half a step forward in the brush. The crouching man said something that made the man in white stop, and he looked back at me desperately. They both glanced at my approaching family, then silently ducked into the bushes, scrambling into the thicket. I couldn't see them anymore. When my parents were close enough, I climbed down and immediately tried to tell them what happened. Unfortunately, because I was a kid, I have this weird reflex where I giggle and laugh hysterically when I'm terrified out of my mind. It's an awful habit and makes me look like a lunatic to this day. Since I was laughing like a maniac and bouncing around with nervous energy, my parents assumed I was making up some weird story about an imaginary friend or talking about a cartoon I'd seen. I kept insisting it was real that night and the next day, but my parents refused to believe me and told me to stop or I'd get in trouble. I buried the incident in my mind after that. I never saw the 2 men again, nor heard anything about them. But about 2 years later, the brush was torn up and the remnants were burned to the ground by the school with no explanation given to us kids. My family moved away from that house when I was in 5th grade, then out of state when I was in 7th. When I was 16, during a family dinner, something prompted me to tell the story again. My parents stopped eating, looked at each other in horror, and my mom quietly asked if I was seriously telling the truth. I exasperatedly assured them I was, jokingly adding that I was pretty damn close to ending up on a milk carton. I regretted saying that because I could see both my parents' faces turn pale as they realized just how close they'd come to losing me all those years ago. The story I'm about to share is one that began at my father's house after he decided to rent it out to strangers, which led to a series of events so horrifying and tragic that I could never have anticipated them. It's a chilling tale, one that has left me deeply scarred, but I feel compelled to recount it as a cautionary story, a lesson for others not to make the same mistakes. Let me take you back to where it all began. The story I'm about to tell happened many years ago, starting from when I was just a child. I grew up in a middle-class family. My parents were neither rich nor poor, so I never had to struggle like some of my peers. At the time, we lived in my grandmother's two-story house, which she and my late grandfather had purchased before his passing. After he died, my grandmother fell into deep despair, living alone and heartbroken. To help her cope, my parents moved us into her home. Eventually, with encouragement of her children and grandchildren, she found strength and threw herself into work. Over time, she became financially successful, earning millions of dollars through her business. With this newfound wealth, she bought the adjacent plot of land and built another two-story house for my family to live in alongside hers. "Oh, come on now," my mother would joke sometimes. "You act like you're trying to kick us out." She'd tease my grandmother playfully. "I spent a fortune building that house so we could all stay together as a family, and here you are accusing me of chasing you away." My grandmother, quick-witted as ever, would fire back. "If you don't want to live there, go ahead and demolish it." Of course, no one actually meant those words. It was all friendly banter between them. Life during that period was peaceful and happy. My father loved to joke around with my grandmother, often teasing her until she feigned anger, though deep down, she always enjoyed their playful exchanges. Time passed, and the new house was finally completed. But because we were so used to living with my grandmother, my parents only occasionally stayed in the new house. Most of the time, we remained in the original home, living together as an extended family. That is, until one day everything changed. My grandmother suddenly fell ill with acute kidney failure and passed away less than 24 hours after being rushed to the hospital. Her death hit us hard. Though she had been elderly, losing her felt sudden and devastating. As her only child, my father inherited everything, the two houses and all her belongings. From that point on, it was just the three of us, my father, my mother, and me. Out of habit, we continued to live in the larger house where my grandmother had resided, while the other house sat locked up, untouched except for occasional cleaning by my mother. Years went by, and I was around 14 years old when things began to shift. One afternoon, after returning home from school, I overheard my father discussing something with my mother. He mentioned wanting to rent out the unused house next door, reasoning that having tenants would ensure the property was maintained and cleaned regularly. Plus, it would bring in some extra income. My mother wasn't thrilled about the idea. "Do you really think this is wise?" she asked hesitantly. "What if they cause trouble? The houses are so close together, and we share the same fence." After some deliberation, my mother suggested putting up a divider between the two properties to create more separation. But my father dismissed the idea, citing the high cost of construction and how long it would take to recoup the investment. "Let's find trustworthy tenants instead," he said confidently. "I'll screen them carefully. If they seem reliable, we'll collect a few months' rent as a deposit. That should minimize any risks." Despite her reservations, my mother reluctantly agreed. By then, she had recently quit her job due to health issues and lacked financial independence, leaving her unable to argue against my father's decision. About a month later, my father traveled out of town for a work meeting. While he was away, he called my mother to inform her that someone interested in renting the house would be coming by to view it that afternoon. "I've already spoken to him briefly," my father assured her. "He seems trustworthy, but feel free to decide for yourself once you meet him." That afternoon, as my mother and I waited at home, we heard a taxi pull up outside. A woman stepped out, looking younger than my mother, carrying bags and boxes. After setting her belongings down near the entrance, she leaned back into the car to retrieve something else. Moments later, she emerged holding a sleeping toddler, likely around 2 or 3 years old. The sight of the frail-looking child stirred sympathy in both of us. Without hesitation, my mother went outside to help carry the woman's things and invited her inside for water and refreshments. She even showed her around a vacant house, which the woman seemed to love immediately. Moved by compassion, my mother decided these two, just a young mother and her small child, posed no threat. Convinced they would be harmless neighbors, she called my father and gave her approval to let them move in. For a while, life returned to normal. The tenant and her daughter kept to themselves, rarely causing any disturbance. Occasionally, we'd hear the child crying faintly in the distance, but otherwise, they were quiet neighbors. However, as weeks turned into months, strange occurrences began to unfold. One night, as I lay asleep, I was jolted awake by a piercing scream that echoed through the darkness. Startled, I bolted upright in bed. My mother, too, had heard it. "Did you hear that?" she whispered anxiously. It sounded like someone screaming from the neighbor's house. Confused and frightened, we couldn't ignore the noise. My mother turned on the lights, and together we cautiously stepped outside to investigate. As we approached, I noticed the lights were on in the neighboring house. Faint sounds of retching sobbing and screams drifted through the air. Terrified but curious, I hurried closer to get a better look. Peering through the window, what I saw made my blood run cold. The tenant was violently vomiting. Tears streaming down her face, she collapsed onto the floor. Her clothes were stained with bile, and her entire body trembled uncontrollably. Rushing inside, my mother tried to comfort her, asking what happened. What the woman told us next was beyond comprehension. She claimed to have been haunted by a ghost, an elderly hunchbacked woman who had appeared in her room. According to her account, the apparition loomed over her bed, glaring menacingly before spitting beetle nut juice directly into her mouth and forcing her to swallow. The memory alone sent her into shock, prompting her to gag and vomit uncontrollably. I felt like I was choking, as if something rotten had lodged in my throat. It was agonizing, almost unbearable. I was completely baffled because the house we were talking about was my father's house, the one my grandmother had built for us. I used to sleep there often when I was younger, but after my grandmother passed away, I stopped going there entirely since we all lived in the other house. After that night, I tried to forget everything, convincing myself nothing unusual had happened and that perhaps she had just been dreaming. But then, one day, I saw the little girl playing outside by herself, sitting in the dirt and sand. Feeling sorry for her and wanting to cheer her up, my mother went over and picked her up, intending to find some toys or snacks for her. As my mother held the child, she started chatting with her casually, asking where her mother was and why she was playing alone. What the child said next sent chills down both our spines. She told my mother that she was scared of living in that house because she often saw her mother talking to someone she couldn't see. My mother pressed her, asking what she meant and if she could describe what she saw. The girl explained that many times when she woke up, she would see her mother sitting and arguing with an old woman. Almost every time, the old woman would try to force her mother's mouth open and make her eat something. Sometimes, the old woman would spit blood into her mother's mouth, which made me think it might be beetle nut juice. Afterward, her mother would start convulsing, screaming, and vomiting. Hearing this terrified me, and my mother immediately forbade me from going near that house or interacting with the tenant. For a while, things seemed to quiet down, and I thought maybe the strange occurrences were over. But one night, as I sat outside talking on the phone with a friend from school, I suddenly froze. In the dim light, I spotted someone standing in front of the rented house. They were dressed strangely, in baggy gray clothes with long unkempt hair and a swollen belly, looking sickly. At first, I wasn't sure who or what it was, so I squinted and cautiously walked closer. When I finally got a clear look, I realized it was a real person, staring blankly ahead without blinking, their gaze fixed outward. The sight of them standing there like that horrified me, and I rushed back inside to tell my parents. My parents were equally alarmed and quickly grabbed a flashlight before running over to investigate. When they shone the light toward the figure, we were all stunned. It wasn't a stranger. It was the tenant, but she looked completely unrecognizable. Gone was the once beautiful woman. Now she appeared gaunt, with thinning hair, sagging skin, and an overall eerie demeanor. Despite her terrifying appearance, she was still human and could answer questions coherently. Back at home, my mother urged my father to evict her, fearing she might die in the house. But my father hesitated, unwilling to throw her out given her condition. "Where will she go?" he argued. "How can a child that young survive on her own?" My mother, usually kind-hearted and loving, became unusually insistent, revealing how deeply frightened she truly was. Eventually, my father decided against eviction and instead visited her frequently, helping arrange medical care. Over time, her condition improved slightly. Another puzzling detail was that despite not working, she continued to pay rent on time every month without fail. This reassured my mother somewhat, and for a brief period, life seemed to stabilize. However, new horrors soon emerged. One night, as I came downstairs for a glass of water, I witnessed something utterly unbelievable. My mother was standing motionless in the middle of the house, not bothering to turn on the lights. And then I noticed her face. Her mouth was gaping wide open, unnaturally so, as if it could swallow a handhole. Her eyes bulged, veins protruding across her neck, and she emitted a wheezing sound, like air being forced through a pipe. Then she slowly walked upstairs to her room. Terrified, I trembled uncontrollably, but by morning, everything seemed normal again. My father, who had been asleep in the same room, hadn't noticed a thing. However, from that day forward, I began to feel that my mother was no longer herself. Her behavior changed drastically, her personality, her way of speaking. It was as if she had become a different person entirely. One day, unable to ignore my growing unease, I decided to confront her. I entered her room and found her sitting at the foot of the bed with her back to me. I called out to her, and when she turned around, I nearly fainted. Her face, it wasn't hers anymore. It was pale, almost ghostly, with blackened teeth chewing on something, and her stomach was noticeably swollen. At first, she wore a faint smile, but it gradually morphed into an expression of deep sadness. In a voice that didn't sound like her own, she whispered, "Help me. I've been cursed." That moment shattered me. Given that my father was out of town, I immediately called him. He told me he would rush back as soon as possible, but instructed me to keep an eye on my mother and ensure she didn't leave her room until morning. I stayed awake all night, sitting outside her door. At one point, I stepped out of the house to clear my head and noticed something strange. There were freshly covered holes in the ground near the front yard. It baffled me. Who could have dug them? And how had these things happened without our knowledge? I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister was at play, so I grabbed a shovel and began digging. The first hole revealed a bundle wrapped in cloth containing my mother's comb and hair ties. My blood ran cold. In the second hole, I found her handkerchief. The third contained household items like spoons, ladles, and bowls. But it was the fourth hole that truly unnerved me. It held a plastic bag attached to an antique doll, inside of which was a photograph of my mother. Unable to stop, I kept digging and unearthed more of my mother's belongings, a pillbox, her toothbrush, and even the glasses she had been looking for. Then came 3 unfamiliar objects. Instantly, I realized they must belong to the tenant woman. Overwhelmed with dread, I sat silently crying, unsure what to do next. By afternoon, my father returned home. I showed him everything I had found, and he decided to take the cursed items to the temple for disposal. Shortly after he left, the phone rang. A stranger asked if I was related to the owner of the number. When I confirmed I was his son, the caller informed me that my father had died in a car accident, a rollover crash. They urged me to come identify his body. I nearly collapsed but managed to verify the details. His ID, clothes, and vehicle registration all matched. It was undeniable. My father was gone. Meanwhile, my mother descended further into madness. She became catatonic, wandering around the house like a ghost. Overwhelmed, I turned to my uncle and aunt, my mother's siblings, for help. After the funeral, they came over to discuss the situation. Together, we decided to check the rented house. To our shock, just one day after my father's death, both the tenant and her daughter had vanished without a trace. Confused and desperate for answers, my aunt sought out a shaman. When the shaman arrived and saw my mother, he immediately confronted her. "Did you do this? Everything is ruined because of you. Your husband is dead, your family destroyed, and next might be your child." At those words, everyone froze. Suddenly, my mother burst out laughing. She confessed everything. That woman was sleeping with my husband. He brought her here, and her child is his too. I cursed them to drive them away. I never meant for anyone to die. She explained that she discovered the truth after checking the bank statements. The monthly rent payments were coming directly from my father's account. On several occasions when he claimed to be traveling for work, he was actually sneaking into their rented house. Consumed by rage, she cast a spell to make them leave, not intending to kill. But once they fought back with dark magic of their own, it spiraled out of control. After that confession, my mother suffered a complete breakdown. My uncle and aunt restrained her and took her away for treatment. As for my father, whether his fatal accident was truly accidental or caused by the cursed items he removed remains unclear. Either way, the weight of those cursed artifacts ultimately cost him his life. In the end, my mother didn't last long either. She passed away shortly afterward, leaving me alone to grapple with the aftermath. I never saw the tenant or her daughter again. Their fate remains a mystery, as does the identity of the vengeful spirit my mother summoned. The story concludes on a tragic note, filled with sorrow and regret. Though part of me still loves and pities my mother, understanding that she acted out of pain and betrayal, the scars left by these events will haunt me forever. 3 lives intertwined through betrayal, revenge, and supernatural forces, leaving wounds etched deep into my heart and soul. This isn't my story, it's my mother's. To give you some context, I'm a 17-year-old girl who recently moved in with my dad and his family. I lived with my mom my entire life until this past summer, when things with her became not just difficult but outright dangerous. My mom has a history of getting into rocky relationships that always seem to end with an abusive man, no matter how charming he seems at first. Growing up, I had to mature quickly because I felt compelled to protect her. But I eventually realized she didn't really want protection. So I made the decision to spend my remaining high school years in another state with my dad, mainly to escape the exhausting routine of staying up until the early morning hours, watching over my drunk mother to ensure her boyfriend didn't beat her to death. My mom lives in a tiny old trailer, over 50 years old to be exact. It's not just small, it's in rough shape. The furniture isn't great, though she does have some nice decor passed down through her family and a few decent pieces of furniture we got when we first moved in together. The trailer has its quirks, which were never fixed because the landlord is incredibly cheap. For instance, the front door can be forced open with enough strength, even if it's locked. This detail becomes critical later. My mom also has her dog, Simba, to keep her company. Simba isn't your typical house dog. He's a pit bull mix, fiercely protective, but also the most loving dog you could imagine. My mom got him for protection, especially because she's very sick. She has Hodgkin's lymphoma, an aggressive form of cancer. For personal reasons, she's chosen not to undergo chemotherapy, but she does certain treatments to keep going. Simba is there to provide companionship and protect her since she can't easily defend herself, though she's capable of putting up a fight. Unfortunately, Simba has severe separation anxiety, which leads him to chew on anything and everything when left alone. Once he even swallowed a lighter. We still don't know how or where he got it. Because of this, my mom has to lock him in a kennel when she's out, as he's destroyed things we can't afford to replace. When I lived with my mom, I stayed home a lot. It's not that I didn't have friends or wasn't social. I was actually pretty popular at school. But I wasn't into partying or going out much, unless it was to grab food with friends, catch a movie, or spend the night at someone's place. So most weekends I was at home. I'm not an only child. I have a half-brother named TJ, who hasn't made the best life choices. My mom and I didn't keep in touch with him much, partly because of his behavior, and partly because he only reached out when he wanted money. Money we knew would go toward drugs or alcohol. My mom worked retail, which didn't pay well, so we didn't have much to spare. Whenever TJ called or texted, we usually ignored him, knowing he was likely after cash we couldn't afford to give. By late 2015, TJ's drug use escalated to hardcore substances, meth, cocaine, anything he could get his hands on. This made my mom distance herself from him even more. One night, she was out with her boyfriend, meeting some family members, and didn't have her phone on her. While she was talking, she realized she left her wallet at home. It wasn't a big deal, but she liked to keep it with her because an untrustworthy friend, who still had a key to our trailer and claimed to have lost it, had been stealing her medication. My mom suspected this friend was sneaking in, so she was uneasy about leaving her cash and debit card behind. The trailer wasn't far, so she decided to head back, a trip that took about half an hour. Before she left, she noticed TJ had been calling her repeatedly. She didn't call him back, not wanting to deal with her newly discovered meth addict son begging for money to fuel his habit. When she pulled into the driveway, something felt off immediately. The front door was ajar. This is where the faulty lock comes into play. The door doesn't just open with force, it also needs to be slammed shut, even when locked, or it'll bounce back open. My mom distinctly remembered slamming it shut when she left, and we always tugged it to double check. Seeing it open, she knew someone was inside. Since her headlights would have signaled her arrival, she figured whoever was there likely knew she was back, unless they were in the rear of the trailer. Taking small precautions, she stepped inside. Simba was in his kennel and started whimpering the moment he saw her. She moved to let him out for protection when someone grabbed her from behind. At first, as she struggled, she had no idea who was attacking her. I don't know every detail of what she went through, but she soon realized it was TJ. She was shoved into a table and had to scramble back to her feet. She fought back as TJ charged at her full force, wrapping his hands around her neck. Simba was going berserk in his kennel, nearly breaking out, but he couldn't escape. Somehow, my mom managed to pry TJ's hands off her throat and kept fighting, but she was thrown around the living room. The struggle left holes in the walls, broke furniture, and shattered family knickknacks. TJ's hands found her neck again, and this time she was helpless. My mom has thin blood due to her condition, and she'd cut her hand during the fight, causing her to bleed heavily. Between the blood loss, a few cracked teeth, and the pain, she was in agony, even with adrenaline pumping. Looking into TJ's eyes, she could tell he was high on something. She didn't know what. Desperate, she begged for her life. "William, please, I'm your mother," she cried. She later said something shifted in that moment. The hatred in his eyes flickered, and he let go. He glanced around, looked at her one last time, and bolted out the front door. The neighbors had already called the police, who arrived and took my mom's statement. TJ was found the next day and arrested for possession of drug paraphernalia. He wasn't charged with the assault because my mom couldn't bring herself to press charges. It turned out he'd broken in, thinking she was gone for the night since her car wasn't there. He was after money and her medication, fueled by a high dose of speed. I can't stop thinking about what might have happened if I'd been there. I was almost always home on weekends. If I'd been the one to face TJ, I don't think I would have made it out alive. I'm just grateful my mom survived, not only because she's my mother, but because I don't think I could live with the knowledge that my own brother killed her. I attend a community college in Pennsylvania, located in a city known for being run down and dirty. Fortunately, my college is on the outskirts, in a much nicer area. It's near a river surrounded by trees, with modern buildings and well-lit parking lots, details that make it feel safer and more pleasant than the inner city. Still, given the location, we do have a mix of students, including some who've been to prison or are on the sex offender registry. Most of the ex-convicts I've met are genuinely trying to rebuild their lives through education, but I can't say the same for the sex offenders I've encountered. Before the incident I'm about to share, I'd had 2 prior run-ins with registered offenders. Those weren't too serious, just some harassing phone calls that stopped after I blocked their numbers and threatened to press charges. Those stories aren't worth diving into, but they set the stage for what happened with a man we'll call Bill. I didn't know Bill was on the sex offender registry when this started. I'm a computer major, and Bill was pursuing a similar tech-related degree, so we shared several classes. I'd had at least one class with him for the past 2 semesters. To paint a picture of Bill, he's in his late 40s, balding with whitish gray hair, heavy set at around 350 pounds, and just under 6 feet tall. During our first semester together, Bill would chat with me occasionally. He never seemed creepy, just lonely like a guy with a dull life and no friends. I felt a bit sorry for him. Since it's a community college, I'm used to classmates of all ages, so our conversations didn't strike me as odd. Still, it started to feel like I was his only friend, which got a little annoying. After summer break, my 4th semester began, and sure enough, Bill was in one of my classes again. I didn't mind too much and was even a bit relieved to see a familiar face. We picked our seats for the semester, with one seat between us occupied by a kind woman in her late 30s or early 40s. Everything seemed normal until about halfway through the term. Out of the blue, Bill sent me a Facebook friend request. Since I'd known him for months, I accepted it without much thought. But within 5 minutes of accepting, he messaged me privately, asking if I had a boyfriend. That felt off. My profile picture was of me and my boyfriend, and my About Me section, visible to all my Facebook friends, clearly stated I'd been in a relationship for over 3 years. Giving him the benefit of the doubt, I figured he might have thought the guy in my photo was a friend or sibling and hadn't checked my profile. I replied that yes, I did have a boyfriend. He just said, okay, and that was it. But after that, things got weirder. In every class, Bill started asking me questions about my boyfriend, personal stuff I didn't want to share. I lied in my responses because my relationship was none of his business. On top of that, whenever I missed a class, he'd grill me about why I was absent. I always said I was sick, though I was only actually ill a few times. Some days, I just didn't feel like going since the professor didn't take attendance. One day, during a 15-minute break in our 3-hour class, I went to the restroom and checked Facebook on my phone while sitting on the toilet. Later, Bill said to me, "Oh, how were you active on Facebook 30 minutes ago if we were in class, huh?" I was mortified, not wanting the professor to think I was on my phone during class instead of just checking it in the bathroom. Furious, I snapped, "Why are you so obsessed with when I'm on Facebook?" He smirked and said, "Because you're obviously the Facebook queen." That made my blood boil. I wanted to slap him. I know girls who are glued to their phones, and just because I checked my page in the bathroom, of some stereotype. Plus, it felt insanely creepy that he was monitoring when I was active online. There was another woman in our class, Lorraine, who I had a different class with that semester, one Bill wasn't in. She was in her late 50s or early 60s. In that other class, I was talking to my good friend Angel, a guy in his late 30s with a wife and kids. Angel's a great family man who sees me almost like a daughter. A while back, there was an incident on campus with a homeless man wandering the parking lot where I park. Since then, Angel has insisted on walking me to my car to ensure I'm safe. I always tell him I'm fine. I carry mace in my school bag and keep a pocket knife in my car. But he says he'd never forgive himself if something happened to me that he could have prevented. I get it, so I'll let him walk me for his peace of mind. I mentioned Bill to Angel, including the Facebook message and his constant questions about my boyfriend. Angel gave me a weird look and said it sounded strange. Lorraine overheard and chimed in, saying, "Just be careful around him." I asked why, and she said she'd tell me after class to avoid discussing it during the lesson. Lorraine had my number since we shared classes, and later she texted me, "I can't say much, but look up Bill on Megan's Law. You might want to be cautious." I appreciated her warning, even if she had to be vague due to legal restrictions. I looked up Bill and found he had a record for unlawful contact or communication with a minor, plus a charge for possessing child pornography. I'm 24, not a minor, so it wasn't directly related to me, but I found it repulsive. I couldn't stay friends with someone like that. The discovery sent a chill down my spine, and I started getting bad vibes about him. I told Angel later that day, as he could tell I was shaken. He was as disgusted as I was and said, "It makes sense why he might be into you. You've got that baby face, and at 24, you still look young, no wrinkles. That probably attracts him." It made sense. My skin's not perfect, but it's wrinkle-free, and I do look younger than my age. That day, I blocked Bill on Facebook. That's when things got even stranger. In our next class, the first thing Bill said to me was, "What's wrong with you? I haven't seen you on Facebook the past couple of days." I replied, I took myself off Facebook. His face turned beet red, and in an angry, aggravated tone, he snapped, "Why would you do that?" Trying to stay calm, I said, "I just don't want to be on it right now." He scoffed, still fuming, and muttered, "Whatever." I was livid. Why was he so mad about me leaving Facebook? Was it because he couldn't creep on my photos or stalk me anymore? I was tempted to confront him, but kept my cool. What creeped me out more was that I'd only blocked him 2 days earlier, and he noticed that fast. If a friend blocked or deactivated their account, I probably wouldn't even notice. His obsession was alarming. I told my boyfriend everything, and he found it bizarre but wasn't too worried since he knew I could handle myself. We're in a long-distance relationship, so he's not around often. We only see each other once or twice a month for a weekend. Things stayed awkward, but nothing major happened in class until the next Saturday's session. Bill was giving off a terrible vibe, but I chalked it up to my anxiety overreacting. Still, I was freaking out internally, so I texted Angel, who I message often. He lives near campus and offered to meet me to walk me to my car. I assured him I was fine, just feeling uneasy. When class ended, I started walking to my car. As I passed under a dark bridge a few feet from the main road, I heard a voice say, "Hey." I had earphones in playing music, so I hadn't noticed anyone behind me. I turned around, and there was Bill, staring at me with the wildest, creepiest smile I'd ever seen. Before I could react, he threw his backpack down and grabbed me by the throat. I knew he was odd, but I never thought he'd be capable of this. For an out-of-shape guy, he was shockingly strong. I tried kicking him and digging my nails into his hands to pry them off, but my school bag, with a mace inside, fell off my shoulder out of reach. I was weakening as he wrestled me to the ground. My vision blurred, and everything started fading to black. He kept one hand on my throat, pinning me with his knees, and used his other hand to roughly rub my crotch over my leggings, saying, "Yeah, you like being rubbed, don't you, you dirty bitch?" I was sure I was losing consciousness. My vision went dark, and all I could hear was my heartbeat. Suddenly, Bill's hand was off my throat, and he was curled up on his side in pain. Angel was helping me up. Apparently, he'd had a bad feeling after my text and drove to campus to check on me. He clocked Bill in the head and kicked him in the stomach to get him off me. Angel said, "Come on, we should tell security and get you medical attention." I was standing, but I couldn't move, frozen, not with fear, but with pure hatred and a thirst for revenge. I walked over to Bill, rolled him over, straddled him, and said, "This is what you wanted, right?" Then I punched him in the face repeatedly until his face was bleeding. Angel, worried I'd get in trouble for assault despite Bill's attempted rape, pulled me off and told Bill to clean himself up and keep quiet, or he'd have friends take care of him. Angel walked me past my car and around the parking lot until Bill was out of sight, a smart move to ensure Bill didn't see which car was mine. My neck was badly bruised, but I covered it with a scarf. I knew I couldn't live with myself if Bill hurt another girl, so I called the school and left an anonymous tip saying I knew he was on Megan's Law and that he'd been giving me creepy vibes, like he was following me. That was my last semester, so I never had to see Bill again, thank goodness. My tip paid off. The next semester, Bill tried the same thing with another girl on campus. Fortunately, she wasn't hurt, and Bill was arrested quickly because a campus security officer had been watching him, having noticed suspicious behavior. I know Bill went to jail, but I don't know how long he was sentenced for or if he's still there. I haven't seen or heard from him since that day. I owe Angel my life, or at least my sanity. I'm certain Bill would have raped or violated me in some way. I don't know if he would have killed me, but I'm grateful I didn't find out. When I was a freshman in college, I took a summer off to work and make some extra money to support my family. There wasn't much in the way of decent jobs where I lived, as the local economy had sucked, but I managed to score a pretty sweet deal. I'm Native American, and the local tribe sponsors a program where people under the age of 25 can choose a local job and work in exchange for the tribe paying them instead of the business. I had a few prospects, but I settled on a custodial job at a local church. I thought it would be nice to lend a hand to them anyway, as their aging custodian didn't always have the time to get to everything between his other jobs. The job was easy, and the pay was pretty nice for what it was. The local tribe would pay well over the minimum wage, especially to college students. The custodian gave me a rundown of what I was supposed to take care of between services, but after that, I was on my own for the remainder of my time working there. Like I said, the job was easy enough. I'd arrive at about 7 a.m. in the morning, pick up what little trash may have accumulated on the lawn, then move inside and vacuum where necessary. I maintained the bathrooms every few days, dusted, or did the lawn work. But the majority of my work was inside the church. The other custodian did the mowing and lawn work in the evenings after I'd left. The only problem I had with it was that the church didn't have the money to run the AC during the week when no one was there, so the church was extremely hot inside. I really enjoyed being able to work on my own, and the peace and quiet was much appreciated. I was supposed to work 8 hours a day, but my work really took more than 5 or 6. I tended to work pretty slow, so I would still have something to do throughout the week. At one point, the manager of the program told me that if I finished work early, I could take a paid siesta on a comfortable couch at the church. A job that pays you to take a nap sounds like a win-win, right? Let me tell you a little bit about the church. It was the second largest in the town I lived in, but it wasn't too terribly massive. There were about 50 or so rooms, with about 2 or 3 sub-rooms within those rooms. Most of them were rarely used, though, so I didn't have to bother too much with cleaning them. The church was split into 2 buildings. The main building, which was where the services and most of my work took place, and a fellowship building located down a short walkway from the main building. The main sanctuary, where the services took place, was in the center of the building with large double doors out front, and the rest of the church was built around it. I think the sanctuary was the original church, but as the church grew, they built around it. The outer portion of the church was sectioned into 3 long hallways with classrooms littering the halls. The hallways formed a very angular upside-down U-shape around and behind the sanctuary. There were a few other things that made the job interesting. The church had a problem with vandals breaking in from time to time, so when I got there in the morning, I always locked the doors behind me as I moved through the building. I always double-checked the entry/exit doors once I arrived to make sure that they were locked and secured. I was there by myself, but I figured my car parked out front would dissuade anyone from wanting to break in. Another quirk was that the building had been built with an absence of windows. The main sanctuary was the only room that had any windows, and thus was the only room that wasn't pitch black when the lights were off. The last quirk I remember was that the wiring in the building was pretty bad. It wasn't a shock hazard or fire hazard, but it wasn't designed very well. Some of the light switches or breakers didn't control the lights or power for any rooms nearby. One in the hall, for example, controlled the lights and power for a small room on the other side of the building. Still, though, the job was a pretty sweet deal for what it was. The first month of work was pretty uneventful. I generally showed up at 7 a.m., did my thing, and left by 4 p.m. I can't really remember anything exceptionally creepy leading up to when things got started, but then again, if anything had been going on, I probably dismissed it as the building shifting or something. The first truly odd thing that happened seemed to come out of nowhere. It was the middle of the day, and I had been vacuuming and checking classrooms when all of a sudden, I started to feel really ill. It was hot in there, so I thought I'd make sure I wasn't dehydrated. I went to the back center hall of the building, where the water fountain was, and made sure to drink plenty of water. I sat on the bench in the hallway. The center hall was the only area that had the lights off, as I had turned the breakers off in the rest of the building to save the church money on utilities. As I sat on the bench, I started to feel ill again, only it felt different this time. I got this odd feeling in front of my head. It's hard to describe, but it felt like someone had their hand in my brain and was groping around. The next thing I knew, I fell over on the bench and passed out. I was only out for a half hour or so, but while I was out, I remember having a vivid nightmare. In my nightmare, I was alone in a poorly lit dining hall. A great table was in the center, with ivory chairs surrounding it. A feast had been set at the table, but there was no one sitting at the table. The only light in the room was from the candles on the table. I started to sit down at the table to figure out what was going on, but before I could, I noticed something odd about the shadows cast by the candlelight. The lights were casting a lone shadow at the far end of the table. The shadow cast the silhouette of a large figure sitting at the end of the table in a head chair. The silhouette was massive and looked like it belonged to an 8-foot tall man. I didn't know how much, but I knew to fear whatever was making that shadow. I got up from the table to run away, but there was no door to exit through. The last part of the dream I remembered was me cowering on the floor while the silhouette loomed over me like a cat over a doomed mouse. I woke up at that point, but when I opened my eyes, I couldn't move the rest of my body. I stared forward, and for a brief second, I could have sworn that the figure was standing over me. I fought with all of my mind to move any part of my body, but to no avail. I passed out again. I woke up shortly thereafter, frightened and sweaty all over. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck, but I dismissed it as a bad heat-induced dream. I didn't let it get to me too much and finished my day. The next day, when I walked into the church, something seemed off. I still can't put my finger on it, but the lights seemed to have a strange glow to them, and the hallways didn't feel so empty. I tried to ignore it and get my job done quickly so I could leave the main building. Over the next few days, I suffered several more instances of what I now know to be sleep paralysis. I would sit down for a break, get that strange feeling in my head, and then pass out. Each time, I had that dream with only slight variations. The only thing that ever happened differently was that I ran to a different corner of the room to get away, but to no avail. I started dreading going to work, but I really needed the money. A few weeks passed, and things seemed like they were starting to get back to normal. I'd stopped having the sleep paralysis, and I thought whatever was going on was over. I was very wrong. It was nearing the end of my day. I had just finished one wing of the building and had moved to the center hall where the water fountains were. I turned the lights off in the hallway I had just been working through and turned the lights on in the hallway I was now working in. In the middle of my work, I had to go to the restroom, which happened to also be in the center hall next to the water fountains. I did my business and went out into the hall again. I had started vacuuming when I noticed something odd. The lights in the hall I had previously turned off were on again. I initially dismissed it as me forgetting or misremembering and tried to work, but I kept getting this awful feeling. When I got to the far end of the center hall, I heard a large crash. I immediately rushed back to the hall, thinking that the ceiling must have collapsed or something, only to find that nothing seemed to have been disturbed. Now totally bewildered, I decided that it would be best to forget the whole thing and get back to work. I was at the point in the hall where I had heard the first loud crash when I heard another sound. It was a door hinge creaking. I turned quickly to see one of the Sunday school classroom doors swinging slowly back and forth like it had just been opened. That door had a faulty doorknob, so it would never close if you just let it fall shut. The light in the classroom was on, but as I stared, the light turned off. At that point, all I could think was that someone must have broken in. I was scared but also angry, as I knew the subroom in that room was where the children's fundraising money was kept in a lockbox, and I wasn't about to let someone steal from the church. I then said in the most authoritative voice I could muster, "I know you're in there. Come out now, and we can forget this thing ever happened. I'll let you walk away, and if you do what I say, I won't even call the cops." That last part was a lie. I had every intention of calling the police, but for now I was locked inside with an intruder. Slowly approaching the classroom, I pulled out my utility knife. When I got to the door, I pushed it forward and entered the room quickly, knife in one hand and a flashlight in the other, looking in both directions. When I saw no one, I quickly moved to the subroom and checked it out again. I saw no one. I went back to the light switch and flipped it on. I swear I checked every square inch of that room. No one was there. At this point, I was very unsettled. It was about 3:45, so I decided that I had finished the rest of the cleaning later. I turned the lights off again, this time feeling dread with every switch I flipped off. As I was at the end of the center hall again, almost where I had been standing when I heard the other noises, I heard the door creak again. I turned quickly, shining my light down the hall to see the door moving back and forth again. The light flickered on again, only this time it was different. The light was on, but there was a darkness in the room so black that it seemed to be eating the light surrounding it. I didn't care anymore. I turned to run out of there as fast as I could. I heard the door behind me slam open, followed by the sound of large, lumbering steps following me down the hall. I ran to an exit door at the other far end of the building, quickly unlocking the door and tumbling out, falling to the ground. I got back up and pushed the door closed, reaching for my keys to lock it. I held the door closed but could feel someone, or something, on the other side pressing against it with a tremendous amount of force. I looked through the glass section on the door, but couldn't see anyone on the other side. Eventually, after struggling against whatever was on the other side of that door for what seemed like forever, the pressure stopped, and I was able to shut the door all the way, reach for my key, and lock it. I called in sick the next day, which was luckily a Friday. You couldn't imagine how relieved I was that the next week was the end of my regular duties, and the church put me to work volunteering at their youth event out of town. I never told anyone about what happened. A few months afterward, I found out that the pastor of the church had started an affair with a woman he met online. He had started the affair online at about the time that I had the first instances of sleep paralysis. Worse yet, he had left one Thursday to finally go meet her in person, and you guessed it, it was the Thursday when stuff seriously went down for me. I had actually seen him grabbing some stuff from his office across the street from the church that morning. He told me that he was leaving for a convention, but he was actually leaving to meet the woman he'd met. Before all of this came to light near when this happened to me, he told the church that he was stepping down to take care of his terminally ill wife. That was a lie. He shortly after left his wife and their children, cleaned out their bank account, and left his family without a penny. I can't help but feel like his actions are what caused, well, whatever the hell was in that church to happen. That wasn't the last I ever saw of whatever that thing was, but that's another story entirely. Let me start by saying this story isn't really mine. It belongs more to my sister, but I was there when it all went down, and it still creeps me out to this day. My family lives in a small town in England, kind of place where nothing much ever happens. We've been here since I was 3, and in all that time, nothing bad had ever touched us. This happened about 2 years ago. My sister was 17, about to turn 18, and she just finished 6th form. She was getting ready to head off to university, and the school decided to throw a party in town to celebrate the students. Keep in mind, the town's only a 5-minute walk from our cul-de-sac. That evening, around 7 p.m., my sister and her friends headed out to the party. Everything seemed fine. I even took their pictures before they left, all smiles and excitement. My sister mentioned that our mom had told her she'd meet her halfway after the party, since it was set to end at 11:30 p.m. I was 15 at the time, bored out of my mind, so I decided to tag along with Mom for the nighttime walk to pick her up. The plan was set. When the time came, Mom and I left the house to go get my sister. I tried calling her as we walked out the door to let her know we were on our way, but her phone went straight to voicemail. I figured her battery must have died. No big deal. We'd only been walking for about 3 minutes when we spotted my sister coming down the street toward us. Mom suddenly said, "What is she doing?" Confused, I replied, "What do you mean? We're meeting her halfway, right?" Mom shot me a look and said, "No, I told her we were picking her up." In my head, I groaned. Clearly, one of them had misunderstood the other, and I could already sense this was going to spark a fight. I was lost in that thought when Mom's voice yanked me back to reality. She was shouting, practically screaming, down the road. At first, I thought she was yelling at my sister, but then I realized she wasn't. My eyes followed her gaze, and my heart leapt into my throat. There was a man, maybe 5 paces behind my sister, standing at the end of the road. He was tall, dressed head to toe in black, and he'd stopped walking. It hit me like a punch. My sister had been followed from the party. While my sister ran toward us, Mom was screaming at the guy. He froze, probably realizing we weren't just random passers-by, but were there for her. Let me tell you, my mother is not someone you want to cross. She's downright terrifying when she's angry. She was storming toward him, yelling things like, "You bastard, you better not be following my daughter. Come here." The guy, clearly thrown off by Mom's fury and the fact that she was practically charging at him, bolted around the corner and down the road. Mom took off after him, hot on his heels. My sister reached me, and I could see the fear in her eyes. She'd noticed the guy trailing her, and who knows what might have happened if Mom and I hadn't been there. I was so stunned I didn't know what to say. We just stood there silent, watching as Mom came storming back toward us, her face red and her eyes blazing like she was ready to tear someone apart. She looked at me and snapped, "Call the police." I don't have my phone. It took me a second to shake off the shock, but I fumbled for my phone and dialed 999. As I did, Mom grabbed both of us and started pulling us home. She and my sister were already at it, shouting back and forth. "I told you to stay in town. We were coming to get you," Mom yelled. "No, you didn't. You said to meet you halfway," my sister shot back. When the police scheduled to pick up, Mom snatched the phone from me and started ranting to the police about what had just happened, furious that the guy had gotten away. She told the officer they'd better find him because if she saw him again, she'd be going down for murder. And in that moment, I genuinely believed her. When we got home, the house fell silent, but it didn't last. Mom and my sister started going at it again, blaming each other for the mix-up. I couldn't handle their shouting. It was obvious they were both scared and upset, lashing out because they didn't know what else to do. I bolted upstairs, not knowing what to say or how to deal with it. The police showed up about 15 minutes later, took Mom's statement, and went off to look for the guy. They never found him, which is unsettling because he's still out there. The thought that someone who followed my sister, maybe planning something awful, is still walking free is chilling. 2 years have passed, and Mom and my sister are fine now. Every once in a while, Mom brings up the story, and it still makes me cringe. I don't think I'll ever stop looking over my shoulder, and that's a heavy thing to carry. This is something that's been happening to me for close to 3 weeks now, and it's still ongoing. I decided to make a profile on Plenty of Fish because I've been single for 8 months, and I had friends who'd found success on there. I figured, why not give it a shot? About a month after signing up, I got a message from a girl who seemed really attractive, and we hit it off right away. We talked for a few weeks, and things were going great. Eventually, we decided to exchange Kik usernames to keep chatting. That's when everything took a dark turn. After just 4 messages on Kik, she dropped a bomb. The pictures she'd been using were fake. She sent me a new one saying, "This is really me, I swear, I'm not fake, I promise." The new picture was of a girl who looked almost too perfect, and since I'm a huge fan of the show Catfish, I had a gut feeling something was off. I reverse image searched the photo, and sure enough, I found a real person it belonged to. I confronted her about it, and she did it again, sent another picture claiming it was her. I reverse image searched that one too, and surprise, it wasn't her either. At that point, I was fed up. I told her to leave me alone and never contact me again. That's when she flipped out. She started calling me every name in the book, telling me she was a stripper and could pleasure me anytime I wanted, and that I'd lost out by rejecting her. Then things got weirder. I started getting messages from new accounts on both Plenty of Fish and Kik, all claiming to be her friends or people who worked with her. But they all typed the same way she did, and deep down, I knew it was her behind every single one. These friends started threatening me, saying things like, "I know where you live. Her dad's gonna beat the hell out of you." And the one that made my stomach drop, "I know you live in Pine Ridge. That's my neighborhood." This went on every single day. I was getting up to 30 messages a day on Kik, and I never responded. It was relentless. I got so sick of it that I made my Instagram private, deleted my Facebook, took down my Plenty of Fish profile, and created a new Kik account. For about 5 days, I thought I'd finally shaken her. But then 4 days ago, the worst thing happened. I got a message on my new Kik from a username called Killer2 coming for you. When I opened it, I nearly lost it. It was a picture of my house taken from across the street. I could see my bedroom window with a light on. I immediately called the police, but after explaining everything, they told me they couldn't do anything because she hadn't physically harmed me. Thanks for nothing, cops. Since then, I've been sleeping with a knife under my pillow. Thank God she hasn't done anything yet, but just a few hours ago, I got another message on Kik from one of her friends. I know it's her, but she was going off, swearing like crazy, calling me, my mom, and my dad losers. Out of curiosity, I logged into my old Kik account, and sure enough, there were 10 new messages from her. They were all over the place, saying she loved me, but now she's pregnant with some other guy's kid, yet she still loves me and wants to raise the baby with me. She even sent a picture of a pregnant woman with a caption that said, "Proof that I'm pregnant," I saved it, reverse image searched it, and of course, it was all over the internet on thousands of sites. None of it was real. Every day, I'm living in fear, waiting for the next message to pop up. I'm planning to make another new Kik account tonight, but she seems to find them no matter what I do. I've been keeping screenshots of all the messages she sent, so I have proof if I need to verify any of this. I'm sorry this story's a bit long, but thanks for sticking with it. Please wish me luck. Update: the day after I shared this story, I deleted my Kik account and every other social media platform except Facebook, since that's the only way most of my family can reach me. I made sure everything I posted, liked, or shared was set to private. But today, I got a new message in my Facebook message request from someone I won't name, since this is now an active investigation. The message said, "My sister loved you, and you broke her heart. We're coming to kill you. This came in this morning, and I've called the police again." They're finally starting to take it seriously now that they have a name and a message to work with. They said they'll do their best to help, so here's hoping. I worked at a private club that's no longer around, largely because my bosses weren't just running the place for us dancers, they were also deeply tied to the mob. Naturally, that kind of setup drew the feds' attention, and they were itching to shut it down. Back then, though, the club was thriving, a hotspot where men came to, let's say, unwind. Places like this have unspoken rules, the kind you only learn by working there. One big rule was to stay safe and make sure the men didn't mistake your job for something personal, like a relationship. Unfortunately, not every girl followed that rule. One of those girls was Kim. Despite constant reminders from management, Kim didn't just forget this rule, she ignored it completely. It got so bad that her real-life boyfriend started getting jealous. Long story short, she began acting like she was untouchable. Boyfriends weren't allowed in the club, she didn't meet clients outside of work, and with the mob backing us, she figured she had extra protection. The club's layout was simple. You walked through the only door, and straight ahead was a stage. To your left was another stage, and to your right was the door to the locker room with a bar nearby. The men's room was on the same side as the entrance. On most days, it was a typical scene. Men in their seats, girls walking around, a dancer on each stage, and others hanging out in the locker room. That day, Kim was in the locker room, on her phone with her boyfriend, chatting about her shift so far. Everything seemed fine between them, at least that's what she thought. What Kim didn't realize was how fed up her boyfriend was. He was sick of hearing about her job, especially about one regular customer named Steve. She'd come home bragging about the extravagant gifts Steve gave her, and it drove her boyfriend up the wall. While she was on the phone, she got called to perform on stage. She promised to call him back later and hung up, unaware that it would be the last time she'd ever speak to him or anyone. Her boyfriend was already in the club's parking lot, parked in the back, blending in with the other cars. After their call ended, he reached under his seat, grabbed a gun, and got out of his car. He walked straight to the club's entrance and slipped inside, standing just behind the velvet rope like any other guy waiting to flash their club pass. The music changed, and Kim moved from the first stage to the second. As she did, her boyfriend reached inside his coat. The doorman, assuming he was pulling out his pass, didn't think twice, until it was too late. He drew his gun, aimed, and shot her. Then he turned, bolted back to his car, and sped off. The club erupted into chaos. One of the managers, Lisa, tried CPR, but people were scrambling for cover, unsure of what was happening or what to do. Eventually, things calmed down enough for the paramedics to arrive, but by then, Kim was gone. The saddest part, by the time her body was taken away, the big bosses had shown up. They told everyone to get ready to go back to work, ordered the waitresses to clean up the blood, and acted like nothing had happened. I've never seen so many people fall so silent all at once. It was a Saturday night, and I just started working at an adult club. I think it was actually a Thursday when this particular night went down, but it began like any other shift until this guy walked in. I spotted him sitting in a dark corner of the club and approached him, starting with my usual small talk. You know, the standard stuff, how's your day going? Nice weather, huh? It was all pretty routine until he popped the question I'd heard a million times. What would it take to see you outside the club? I was tired of this line, so I gave my go-to response. Sorry, I'm not the one for that, but I'm sure you'll find someone who is. I'll just excuse myself so she can come find you. I turned to leave, but he gently grabbed my arm and said, Everyone here has a price. I smirked and fired back. Yeah, you're right, $1 million, letting out a little giggle. He didn't find it funny. Instead, he stood up, threw about $3,000 in large bills at me, and stormed out the front door. I'm not dumb, so I picked up the cash and went on with my night like nothing happened. But later, the guy came back and told my boss I took his money without dancing for him. I got called into the office, and my boss demanded I return the money. I was pissed. Hell no, I said. He tipped it to me, and not even nicely, he threw it at me and made me pick it up off the floor. My boss went on about how I'd have to take it up with the big guys in the main office, which was a hassle I didn't want. So I offered a compromise. If he wanted compensation, I'd give him a few dances. Since we could set our own rates, I decided $1,000 per song sounded fair. I found the guy back in his dark corner and told him I'd dance for him, asking him to follow me to the dance area. He just said, right here's fine. At that point, I didn't care anymore, so I danced where we were. After a few songs, I stopped, and of course, he started up again about wanting to take me home. I stood up, rolled my eyes, and said, I already told you no. This time, he grabbed my arm, not so gently, and spun me around, saying, I'm not asking. Then he grabbed my throat, lifted me off the ground, and hissed, You don't understand. I live on the 10th floor, and I think your nice body would look great thrown out the window. My mind was racing. This guy was unhinged. I reacted fast, kneeing him right where it hurts. He dropped me with a yell, and the doorman finally rushed over. I told him to get him the hell out. I grabbed a robe on my way out the door, wanting to see what he was driving in case he caused trouble later. Sure enough, he was getting into one of those creepy white vans, you know, the kind with no windows in the back, like something a predator would drive. I asked the doorman why they didn't step in sooner, explaining everything that had happened. They said they couldn't see into that corner anyway. After all that, I decided to call it a night. I got dressed, punched out, and headed to my car to drive home. As I was about to get on the freeway, I noticed that same damn van behind me, honking and signaling for me to roll down my window. I thought, screw that and screw you, dude. When the light turned green, I took the freeway on-ramp, but he followed me. I figured with my hour-long drive home, he'd give up eventually. I was wrong. I sped up, he sped up. I slowed down, he slowed down. After about an hour of this, I was losing it, thinking, damn it, just go already. I started speeding up and slamming on my brakes, hoping to shake him. It was 3 a.m., and the freeway was empty, so this cat-and-mouse game went on for a bit. Then we hit a small bridge, and he started ramming my car. I was in a tiny two-door, and he was in that big van, slamming into me over and over. I fought to stay on the road, but I clipped the bridge's wall. I straightened out and decided this had to end. I grabbed my phone, called 911, and put it on speaker so I could focus on driving. I knew the area well, so I took the next exit, hoping to lose him on the back roads. As I weaved through the streets, I told the dispatcher every turn I made while they kept saying help was on the way. Finally, I saw red and blue lights behind me. The operator told me to pull into an auto shop on the next block. I did, watching the van speed off with police in pursuit. An officer approached my car and, to my shock, told me to step out with my hands up. Before I knew it, I was on the ground in handcuffs, answering questions about my name and what happened. I asked why I was being cuffed, and thank God another officer stepped in, telling the first one I was the victim who'd called for help. He said the first officer was a rookie and apologized. They uncuffed me, and I gave a full statement, which they said they'd follow up on. After everything, I'd never been so relieved to finally make it home.